Hello there makers, it is Jo here and we are on episode 10 of our lingerie series. We've been building up our skills from episode 1 and episode 10 is the sort of climax of our series, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make a corset. It's a simple corset pattern. It's got lots and lots of opportunities for customizing it, making it your own. The actual making of the corset is quite easy. You're just sewing the panels together in the right order. The tricky bits are the fit and how you're going to customize and make a closure on your corset. The pattern I'm using is a corset from a company called Booby Traps, and you'll see all of their lingerie patterns on our website if you head over to Minerva. They're really up-to-date underwear patterns. There's all sorts there. There's knickers, bras, suspender belts, corsets, bustiers, underwide bras, non-underwide bras. There's absolutely a huge selection of lingerie patterns to choose from. This one is a corset pattern. You can have a sweetheart neckline, a straight neckline. You can make it cropped. You can make it longer with some waist fitting. And there's also lots of opportunities to add custom braid or elastic or binding across the top of your corset. The pattern inside is quite simple and easy to follow. A little peek inside the Alana corset. It comes with in an A4 envelope with your pattern pieces, and the pattern pieces are paper, not tissue. There is also a really helpful piece of like Vilene inside, and this is for making a toile. So you cut out your pattern pieces in the size that you want, and you use this for fitting, and you work out what size you need to cut by cutting out a toile from this Vilene. And then you can use the Vilene as your pattern pieces if you want to, if you've made some sort of lengthen and shorten lines, or you've changed the side seams. If you're making the sweetheart neck, try not to pinch any out of the centre front or you'll lose the lovely shape. So there's some fabric inside to make a toile, and quite an inspiring booklet because it shows lots of different views and lots of different styling. So there's the sweetheart neck one with the join at the centre front. This one's at the centre front. This one's got the closure at the back. Some of them are bound with a little bit of detail. And the pattern inside gives you lots of information that you need to read first, because that's general corset making information, but nothing very factory specific. It's for home sewers. So it gives you a couple of methods for how to put your corset together. Are you going to do a lined method? Are you going to do an unlined method? Are you going to do a boning in the outer part of your corset with top stitching method? And it shows you all of those, and there's a little bit of information and some useful pictures. Lots of pictures to show you how to put together the different pieces. It also shows you how to put a busk in the front, and a busk is a firm boned piece at the centre with hooks and eyes on, so that it gives you lots and lots of structure at the front. And people who make historical costumes or cosplay costumes sometimes put the busk at the centre front. And here is an image of the cropped version. So that's what the pattern looks like if you've never seen Booby Traps patterns before. The fabric that I'm using today is a corsetry fabric. It's really thick. Actually on film it's very noisy because it's like a sort of really firm, sort of thin card really. It's got no stretch at all in either direction, not one tiny little bit, not even any ease. So it won't move. So when you get your fitting right, when you make your corset in corsetry fabric, it will be exactly the same size as your toile. You need some good scissors to be cutting this out, and you don't want to pre-wash it. It's fine as it is. And because of the close weave, when you press it, you will get a body contour that looks like the seams are virtually invisible. I'm pairing this with some lining on the inside. You don't have to make a lined corset from this pattern. You can make an unlined one if you choose a different fabric. And I've got a satin lining because that's going to be against my skin and very luxurious on the inside. Sewing with black is a little bit tricky on film, so you'll have to bear with me. I'll try and get some close-ups so that you can see the details of sewing in the black fabric. If you head over to our website, you'll also see the kit list listed below with all of the different products that I've used. There's a couple of options for boning actually. There's 2 different types. There's the thread, some closure, the lining and the fabric. Okay, let's take a look at cutting out this fabric. So a few things about cutting out this corsetry fabric. It does have a right side and a wrong side. So on the right side, you'll see the motifs are slightly shiny. So you get a nice luster. And on the wrong side, they're matte. And there aren't any notches on these patterns because we can't cut into the seam allowance because we need that seam allowance to put the boning in. So make sure that when you cut your corsetry pieces, you then flip them into their opposite positions. Make sure the matte side is up and mark them. So this is the side back and the side back, centre front, and side fronts. And each time I marked them, I double checked whether I'd got the right side and the wrong side showing, and I've marked the wrong side of the fabric with a chalk pencil. Used my usual chalk pencil. This is on the inside. It will be covered by lining, but I absolutely don't want to be sewing these the wrong way around, and I don't want to be unpicking them. So I used really sharp scissors and really strong pins. This is a really strong fabric, so you need some really strong glass head pins. I would recommend that you take the pattern pieces off to then cut your lining. If you keep your paper pattern piece on there and then cut your lining, inevitably you will get a millimetre or a couple of millimetres extra around, so you won't have accurate pieces to sew together. So cut out your corsetry pieces and then cut out the same pieces in lining, but I have removed them from the corsetry fabric. You need to cut the centre front on the fold unless you're putting a busk along the front. This pattern's really good because it's quite versatile. So you can have your join on the front if you want, but you'll need to add a seam allowance. You can have the closure on the back. So you need to decide the style that you're going to make before you cut out, because there's a few minor changes to your cutting if you need to join on closures. If I want the hook and eye closure to be along the front, then I need to have a little piece that comes out to attach the closure to. I'm making mine with the join at the back, so I won't need to add any to the centre front. The centre front is cut on the fold. If you try and cut with your pattern piece on your non-working side, your non-cutting side, the blade lifts up and it peels the paper away, and you knock it with the bottom of your scissors and you knock it with your hands, and you can see there I've got a little bit extra. But if I use my working side, the paper comes up with the fabric and creates a sort of little sandwich. So this here would have been the inaccuracy of that cut. Again, I'll unpin these and mark on which pieces they are, so that the whole time I'm sewing, I'm not looking for which similar piece goes with which piece. This is a satin lining, and again, I've got a right side, which is my super shiny one, which I want against my skin, and the wrong side, which will go against the corset fabric. So there's a little bit of time and effort to make sure that you get accurate cutting, because that will give you accurate fitting. Before you sew your corset, you'll need to be setting up your machine to sew that very thick fabric. So you'll need to wind a couple of bobbins, because you use quite a few, because there's quite a lot of seam lines. And I've also got a different needle in. So here's the machine setup, and then we'll get ready to sew. Corset fabric is quite a thick fabric, so you might need to change up to an 80 or a 90 needle. So you can put one of those in your machine and have a test. You need to change your stitch length down to 2.5 because you want this to be a really nice close seam, even when you really pull it and put it under stress, because you're going to make a really fitted garment. This fabric's quite easy to finger press, and you can check that when you pull you've got the correct tension and quite a short stitch length. Okay, we're ready to go. It's good when you're making a corset to do both sides at the same time. All lingerie making I do like that, so I have on the table everything in the position in which it will be when it's a finished garment. So I'm going to find the positions of all of the pieces, make sure that I've got the right pieces in the right place: side front, front middle, centre front, front middle, side front, side back, side back, centre back, centre back. I can pin all of these together and sew the seams at 1.5 centimetres. Ta-da! That's all of your pieces joined together. And I've pressed it out, but I haven't pressed this bust area because I'm going to show you that at the ironing board, because these seams, when they're pressed out, you can hardly see the joint. Corsetry fabric takes a really high steam press, and it doesn't take any of the sheen off the fabric. If you've got a different fabric, then you might want to use a press cloth on the right side. On the inside, you need to press your seams open. So although we're going to, in a moment, move those seams to a different position, we need to press them open in order to get that flush finish on the right side. So you get the right side finish correct first, and then we'll take a look at those seams when we come to add our boning. But we need to try and get these bust areas here as nice and smooth as these ones, but of course we've got quite a strong curve and we can't clip it like we normally would because we need that seam allowance to use for our channeling. If you were finding it hard to keep the 1.5 seam allowance, you can draw the seams on with a pencil. So if you really want to make sure that you're not going to make the next stage more tricky by having channeling that ends up being too small or too tight, and you're trying to jam plastic boning in a gap that's too tight, then you can draw on your seam allowance. Okay, let's go and take a look at getting a really nice finish here. So I'm going to use my tailor's ham, but I'm not going to use it flat, I'm going to use it on its side. I'm going to find the best bit of curve that fits the curve of the bust shape. And just hold the iron flat, not dragging it, just pressing it with the tip. You can manipulate the ham and use different parts of it wherever you can get a good flat surface. Once you've pressed the seam open from the wrong side, just to check that you haven't got a little sort of roll over, You can then do the same from the right side, and this is where you need to maybe turn your iron down. Just be a little bit careful. This is the right side of your fabric. You can add steam here if your fabric is okay with that. And keep following that seam line around. You can see there it's not quite as smooth as it could be. Got a little bump just there. That's definitely worked. Do the same on the other side. Got a real body contour shape now. Okay, so you've got the really nice smooth finish for your outer garment. And now we need to look at how we're going to put the boning into the fabric. There's a couple of different ways you can do it. It depends if you're lining it. If you're not lining it, you will fold your seam allowance over, sew it down and add your boning. You might need to finish the raw edge. If you're lining it like I am, then I don't need to finish these raw edges. They'll all be hidden behind lining, so you won't see them. So I'll be pressing those over now to one side and sewing it down. That will mean from the right side, I will get a row of stitching next to my seam line, like a sort of top stitch. If you are really happy with this lovely finish and you don't want to have any other stitch lines showing from the right side, then you can insert the boning into the lining, and then this will remain as it is and the boning will all be in the lining pieces. So you need to make a decision about what you're going to do, but first you need to make the lining if you're using one so that you can make that decision. Do I want top stitching or do I want this nice flush finish? We're going to make the lining up in the same way, and let's have a look at some of the design choices we can make if we're lining our corset. I'm going to make the lining by ensuring that all of my pieces are laid out in their opposites, and I have marked them already. This is the boning. It's got a plastic piece in the middle and it's got a sleeve on the outside with little basting stitches on each side that are done at manufacture. So it's already enclosed, which means you can use it on an unlined corset or you can use it as it is here now. I'm going to put my boning inside my outer corset. You can put it in the lining. I have got a boning tutorial you can go to if you want to try some different methods. I'm going to use this outer piece method here, and although we had all of the seam allowances pressed open, that was to get the beautiful finish on the right side, we now want to press those seams to the back, so everything's sort of from the center front, everything's going towards the back. When we get them there, we're going to take a 1 centimetre seam allowance and sew them down, both layers, because if you put both layers down, you get a really firm casing that holds the boning in place. If your fabric is really thick, if you're using a brocade or an upholstery fabric or something really unusual, like a pleather or something for cosplay, then you might need to take out the underseam allowance. But I want this to feel really strong and firm and supportive. Just check that your 1 centimetre seam allowance will give you a little bit of wiggle room to put your boning into that channel that you're going to make. You don't need to finish this seam because we are going to use our lining on the inside. The boning fits inside the corset within the seam allowance, so that's why you need to be really accurate when you're sewing your seams together. Throughout, you will see me marking with chalk or getting my seam gauge, because I want to make sure that the channels that the boning is going to go in is the right size for the boning. So let's take a look at those seam allowances. Okay, let's go ahead and mark on this 1 centimetre allowance, because this can't be too tight. If it's too tight, we won't be able to get the boning inside the casing that we're going to make. Okay, I'm using black fabric, so I've just got a little close-up for you. So this is the boning look, and it's inside this sleeve. So if you weren't lining this, you could place that onto the fabric and machine sew each side or hand sew. Or you can take the sleeve off and you just have this plastic boning. And you want to work with that boning. You want it to be curving along your body. So this is the centre back piece. You can see here, centre back. So we want that to be going in at our waist and then out here at our shoulder. We want the boning to be as comfortable as possible, so here's a few tips for working with boning. For comfort, you might want to just round off the tips of the boning, and that also stops it from poking through the end of your fabric, especially if it's a lighter fabric than corsetry fabric. And you can also just melt the ends a little bit, and that stops them being so sharp. Melt the end and then just smooth out that melted edge on a piece of thick fabric. I've got a piece of denim here. Don't stick your fingers on the end, and smooth it off with your fingertip because it's very hot. And this is where you'll be binding the edge or using an elastic along the edge. So your binding doesn't need to pop right out the top. It needs to be 6mm down, or whatever you're going to use along the top and the bottom. So we want to stop here. So you can insert the binding into that casing. Put your binding into the channels. Just make sure that your binding goes below that seam line. So we've got that little bit left over at the end there for sewing and handling. From the right side, it looks super neat. In fact, you can hardly even see it, but you can see it's going in at the waist and out at the hip and out at the shoulder blade. So that's giving me the shape that I would like. You can press this again from the right side, and now you need to be careful about your iron temperature because you've got plastic in there. I've got my boning coming down to the end. It's not going to go through there. I'm not going to catch my sewing machine needle there. And you can see I've got my seam line and my top stitching line there. And you continue to do this through all of your other curves. Here's one that I've straightened out. I pressed it with steam through a piece of denim. So now I can put this one in here. And this creates a much straighter shape. Okay, everything's boned. Just because I've been handling it a lot, I have just overlocked along the edges. And now you can make a few choices. So it depends what finish you want for your overall corset. So I've got my lining. You can put it right sides together, and you can sew along the top and the bottom and turn it out and press it, and then everything is enclosed. Before you put your linings together, you could also put a lace trim around, you could put a ruffle around, you could put pleats around. There's lots and lots of different customization that you can make to this pattern, and this pattern is very versatile, so it's not fixed in its closures or its final finishes. So think about how you're going to have your finished garment and what you would like along this edge. You could pipe it as well, actually. So there's lots of different things to try. I'm just going to put it together because I want to show you the overall finish. You could also have your corset wrong side up and put your fabric wrong sides together, tack along these seams, and then you could finish them with a fold over elastic, especially if when you've got the fit on, you're getting a little bit of flare around here, because you can add a little bit of tension to your elastic and pull the bust in a little bit. Just sew the top and the bottom, don't sew the ends, because that is where you're going to make a choice about your type of closure. We are getting towards the end now, so now we're going to start looking at the closures. Mine is on the back of my corset. So the lining's all attached. I've added a couple of extra panels at the back between the outer and the lining. That's just given me a little bit more fitting room and closure choice. So I've folded the top down. You could do the same for the bottom, but I'm trying to show you as many techniques from this pattern as possible. So now I'm going to put a piece of bias binding around the bottom. I'm keeping it black. I've pinned it on. I'm going to sew in the press of the bias binding, flip it to the wrong side and sew it. I might machine sew it, but that's going to start getting tricky, because as I come further and further up the corset, then I'm going to be hitting the boning, and if you try and sew through boning, it will break your needle. What you can do is you can sew to the boning and then hand wheel 4 or 5 stitches across the boning. If you turn your stitch length onto 4, it will sort of scoot across that boning a little bit easy with the hand wheel, back to 2.5, and each time I get to a piece of boning, I hand wheel over it. So I'm getting higher up now, so I think I'm going to hand sew that down. First pass machine sew, hand finishing on the inside. It's looking really good. On the back, you've got where your 2 pieces meet, so you can add your piece of hook and eye strip. I've added 2 extra flaps to give me a little bit more fitting room and a few more choices, so I can either use the hook and eyes. I've put a piece of interfacing inside there in case I want to do eyelets and have this modesty piece in the middle so that the lacing goes across the back, or you can put on some of this eyelet, so you would need to put that with the hooks going towards the side, and then this would go on top, so you wouldn't see any of your hook and eyes. You can do it so you can see the hook and eyes, you can do button loops, you can do all sorts of different closures. You can do little covered buttons with Rolu loops that you insert in that side back seam. You can put eyelets and lace ups. You can actually make it button up. Remember that if you're doing your closure on the back, you're going to need somebody to help you get it on. So if you think that that might be a problem, then you might need to make your join down the centre front, but that would have been at the cutting stage so that you could make a little seam allowance. So this pattern really is a customizing corset pattern where you can make it your own. If you are using the hook and eye strip and you need to fold it down to get a neat finish, don't fold down the hooks. You need to just unpick it a little bit and you can get the hook that you don't need out like that, and then you've got some soft fabric to turn over at the end. I'm just going to put a little bit of glue pen on there to stop it bouncing back. And you can machine sew this in place, and then you need to make sure that your hooks are going to match up with your eyes, so you need to fold them at the same places. So finish off your closure whichever way you would like to complete it, and we will take a look at the final corset. And here it is finished. I made a size 16 just to get a bit of an idea of some of the different sizing that you can get in lingerie wear, and booby traps patterns do go up to quite an inclusive size range. So we've got that really smooth contouring that we did with the iron. And remember, when you put a real body inside here, you'll be filling it out more because our skin is more fluid than if you put it on a mannequin. I haven't put any details on. I could put bow on. I could have done all of those customization ideas. I put an extra little panel in the back for fitting for somebody who I don't know if it's going to fit them or not. So there's a little bit of fitting error room there. And I did the two methods of finishing. So I enclosed everything here with the lining. So I sewed them right sides together. And I did actually top stitch that, and I could get through the boning here by using the hand wheel on my machine. Along the bottom, I used a bias trim. So that is trimmed all the way around. And I top stitched that as well because I found, okay, well, I can go over the boning, so I'll do the same for the binding. And it's got a really lovely smooth curved line. The cropped one comes a little bit shorter, so you won't get this curve. Thank you very much for joining me for this whole series. If you've been watching along or if you've been dipping in and out, I hope that has helped you to maybe get on board with some lingerie sewing. It's a really great way to feed your sewing habit because you can make really small things in small periods of time. You don't need a huge space to do lingerie sewing. It's all quite small pieces that you can keep on a table. And I hope that I've shown you a few different products that you might not have seen before, especially the spray glue. I found that to be really useful. Using a little bit of a temporary glue pen to help you with smaller areas. They're all great tips for lingerie sewing. Do head over to our website if you want to look up some other lingerie patterns. They're especially in the booby traps range. There are knickers, bras, and if you want to make a bustier, there's another pattern similar to this over on our website. We would love to see what you've been making, lingerie or otherwise, so do make a free account with us, share your makes, and you can inspire other Minerva makers. We would love to see what fabrics you've been choosing, what patterns you're making up, and anything new that you have been learning. Do call again soon for other tutorials. This was a series, but there are lots and lots of videos over on our website and also on our YouTube channel. There are pattern pairings, whole sew-alongs for whole garments, little peeks into new and up-and-coming patterns and fabric releases. Thank you very much for watching. Do call again soon.